Honey, I blew up the business.
Welcome to the podcast. Good pal of mine, Joe Pack. Good to see you, mate.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Before I get into it, Joe, when did we first meet?
Oh, it's probably 1999, I think.
1999.
And I was 8.
Joe was 8 years old. I'm about, I think I work it out. I'm about 17 years older than Joe.
I didn't know that, actually. I never even thought about it.
Well, I mean,
I've never thought about it because I think we just have such a good relationship and always have.
Oh, it's the big hugging already.
Yeah.
Right. Stop all the nice stuff. We're going to get into the meat of it. But Joe, I taught Joe how to DJ when he was 8 years old. Proper DJ in mind, using vinyl records.
Yeah. Amazing. Actually, you lent me an unbelievable amount of vinyl records that I had for years.
Really?
Yeah. I can remember. I don't even remember when I gave them back to you. It's probably when I was about 15.
Yeah, I was deeply resentful of your stealing my vinyl.
It was amazing though, because I was like an extremely shy kid, and then I was in year 7 at school, and in English we had to demonstrate our hobbies, and I'd never told anybody what my hobby was at all. And people were coming in saying my hobby's football or something like that, and I was like, oh. I said to my mum, can I take my decks into school, please? And she was like, no, I don't think that would be a good idea. And I was like, okay, can I take my vinyl records in them, please? And she said, yeah, okay, some of them. So I just had like a little bag of my vinyl, and then like I stood in front of the class and then just like spoke about some like really niche vinyl records, and people then I made some friends out of that, actually.
Really? Yeah. There you go. How to win friends and influence people, everybody. Take up DJing and cart around
when
your
you're
mind
9.
When you're 9. So if you haven't started yet, it's too late. But Joe is not just an expert DJ and long-standing buddy of mine. He's an entrepreneur, a marketer, a blogger, a mental health advocate, I would say. And he's been a business partner and collaborator of mine for like years, from when you had your first company through to a little kind of, I guess, moment in time where I thought we could sort of jump off the conversation. I mean, just for anybody's benefit who's not joined the podcast before, the whole point of this podcast is to help people overcome things when they go wrong. My life all went to hell in 2017, and I blew up my business and my life. But I turned it around by chatting to people and learning, and that's what I'm trying to do in the podcast. So if you're getting anything from this chat, or you're getting stuff from this chat, please subscribe and share it with your mates and big it up on social media, because the more people know about it, the more people can benefit from some of the insights we're going to get. I'm going to jump right in to the moment of catastrophe for Joe, which is when he had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a bit about your near-death experience, Joe, and how it relates to your entrepreneurial life?
So in July 2016, I started behaving unbelievably unusually. So and that was as a result of working just way too many hours and just putting myself under lots and lots of pressure to perform. But we were in Manchester, in Moss Side, me and my friends one night, and for some ridiculous reason, I picked up a stone, like a fairly big rock, and I just threw it in the air, and it just went straight through someone's window, like a house window. And then later on that day, we went to a party, and someone introduced themselves to me, and I shook their hand by squeezing their hand as hard as I possibly could. I literally have no reason why I did it. I was just obviously having a breakdown. Literally about 2 weeks later, on the 11th of August, I had 5 seizures in my sleep and woke up in hospital a few days later, just about to have a lumbar puncture into my spinal column to check for meningitis. And it turns out that I'd swallowed my tongue during those seizures and been out cold for like 2 days. And I lost almost a year's worth of memory. So like the memory of throwing the stone, they only came back to me about 2 years ago. And a funny thing happened, actually. After I got home from hospital, I went over to my mum's house, stayed there for a month, and the Olympics was on in Brazil at the time. And I was just watching that. And in between the Olympics, Sam Allardyce was being interviewed on TV. And at the bottom, it said, England manager, Sam Allardyce. And I was just saying to my mum, what the hell is Sam Allardyce doing pretending to be England manager? And then my mum just started laughing at me. And it was at that moment, only then, that we realized that I'd lost my memory. So no one had worked it out. The hospital hadn't done any checks. I even went to see a neurologist who hadn't done any checks. And I didn't even think about it. And then then there were so many things that I'd just totally forgotten about. So yeah, it was a pretty major incident that happened.
So this is summer 2016.
Yeah.
So in fact, this is the year before I blew my business up.
Yeah.
And can you just give us a little bit of a description of what your business life looked like to lead you up to have that breakdown?
Never turning off ever was basically, even if I was like relaxing at home, it was still doing something work related. And I was also filming myself on Snapchat all the time, pretending to be fine. And I think that was a huge contributing part of it. Because it's so easy actually when the camera goes on your phone with Snapchat to be like, yeah, great day, I'm going to London, this, blah, 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 blah. And then the camera goes down and you're like, oh, I am not feeling good. So
you had a business at the time, didn't you?
Yeah, I was running Native, which was a digital marketing agency. We were working with brands like Adidas, Levi's, Patagonia, the North Face, NHS, a few other big companies. Dan and I were also working on a side project called Unfake, which was actually quite an innovative idea at the time, where we would connect very large influencers with brands through tech, where they didn't have to have a ongoing relationship with the influencers, and there would be like a fair payment system, and the influencers would own 50% of the business. And it was around the time, I think, that we were going through like the conversations with lawyers about how we'd set up the business structure that I ended up going into hospital.
Yeah, so we were, so a bit of backstory is Joe's business Native was doing social media campaigns and sort of business outreach?
Basically, like we would have very good relationships with the retailers, e-commerce retailers like JD Sports, and very good relationships with the brands as well. And we found a way to help retailers sell more of specific brands. So the brands would put money in and the retailers would put money in. And it was kind of a win-win for everybody. And the reason why that was such a big deal at the time was that a lot of brands were starting to focus on selling direct to the customer, and the retailers did not want that to happen. So we were coming in with a solution that was saying, hey, we can actually sell a lot more of your products through retailers than you can on your own websites.
So how old were you when it was sort of 2015 then, when you had Native and it was going fully?
Yeah, I started Native when I was 21.
Right.
I only started the business actually so I could afford to pay for flying lessons.
Really?
Yeah, I know. But then I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, this is pretty fun, actually. And then we were running it from Bakewell in the Peak District.
Really?
Yeah. And then we were like, okay, this is not a good place actually to, at the time, now everyone's remote, so it would be easy. But at the time, we were like, this is not a good place to really grow this. So we moved to Manchester. And actually moving to Manchester was both a blessing and a curse, because we were then exposed to all these amazing companies and amazing people. And it was amazing. But then there was also like, okay, it's like any night that I want to go out and party, I can. Like any night that I want to go and get pissed, I can. And like there's just so much stimulation for me. And it was just overload, complete overload.
I'm going to come back to overload in a sec. But so you've got this business, you set it up as 21. You've actually been providing a service to my business, helping us with our social media and content. And this is kind of like relatively early on in social media terms. And then you and then you were sort of working too much, partying too much going on. And then the unfake thing, which you just touched on, was in effect a startup alongside your main gig. So it could be characterized as a side hustle, I guess. But it was an investment with my business where we were providing the technology and a lot of the kind of, I guess, you were working with me very closely as founders of this idea. So it was also a side project for me at a time when, looking back, perhaps it was a bit of a distraction for me, with what happened in 2017. And you got to this moment in time where it all got too much. And you had this seizure. And you were and again, as I understood it, you could have died in that moment. Is that right?
Yeah, from swallowing my tongue. That was the problem. And like, because like I'd had one seizure in bed and woken up by my girlfriend at the time. And I remember even really vividly walking down the stairs at her house and my friend who was staying downstairs coming out of the room and looking at me. And I was just like really happy and like, hey, what's going on? Don't know what's happening. And then it's like blank. And apparently the next section was me going into an ambulance. And I had another seizure in the ambulance. And then I was okay, apparently, for a little while. And I was talking, and I was fine, blah, blah, blah. And then my sister and my mum came into the hospital. And then I had the biggest seizure of them all at that point. And that's the one that like nearly took me out. And that's when they were like, because they just keep having seizures over and over again. They were like, there's got to be something seriously wrong with him. So they started brain scanning. They couldn't find anything. They were doing all sorts of blood tests, couldn't find anything. And then they were like, right, he's probably got meningitis because we've done the brain scans. We can't see anything. The blood, we need to check his spinal cord for disease, basically for meningitis. I didn't have that. So they were like, they just did not know. And then the doctors presumed I'd had a drug overdose. Because they just, and again, I'm surprised that they did that because obviously they've done the blood tests. But my mum tells me that doctors actually started to treat me as a drug addict at that point. So I wasn't getting the kind of care that you'd expect. And my mum ended up taking me out of the hospital and putting me in the private hospital in South Manchester, Cheadle Hospital, I think it is. And then at that point, an expert neurologist came and saw me, and within 15 minutes, he knew what the problem was. And it transpired, I'd not told anybody this, not even my mum, but I'd been drinking about 10 coffees a day. Very, very strong coffees. And the thing is, if I've been working like Monday to Friday, 12, 13 hours solid, not sleeping, like chattering my teeth at night, and then come Friday, I'd go out all night, get up on Saturday afternoon, drink loads, go out to the local pub, like in Sale on a Saturday night. And then on Sunday, I'd just sleep all day and eat fast food. And then on Monday, I'd just do it again. So there's no surprise whatsoever that was going to happen to me. I was just a car crash waiting to happen, to be honest.
So yeah, I mean, that's like...
I mean, I've never really spoke to my mum about it. I mean, she will listen to this episode, but like for months running up to the seizures, I was out 2 days, like Friday and Saturday night every weekend as well. So
you were in your late 20s at that
I was 25, 26. Yeah.
So because that's what kind of, I mean, I know what I was like at that time, and that's how I got on. And in fact, I had a kind of burnout episode at age 32, I think it was, after I just had my first child, which you just had your first child. Yeah. And so you're always one step ahead of me, Joe. But I mean, basically, I waited till I was 32 and had a burnout episode, basically doing what you just described. Yeah. And I think there's an interesting thing here of like, but you were on many, many levels, or at least one level publicly, living out the Gary Vaynerchuk hustle fantasy.
Exactly. You know, I'm glad that you say that, because all my friends at the time, apart from my business partner, who was just 1 year older than me, they were all either just finishing university, some were still at university, or they had like entry-level jobs and they weren't taking it that seriously and stuff. And we were like taking it really seriously, like working really hard, trying to grow something, making quite a lot of money, at least in comparison to them. But then we were also partying like we were students. Mm. So he was doing the same thing as well, but he just didn't get caught out as badly as me. And that was just bad. And you know what? So we've spoken about a lot of bad things there, but I still think it's aside from the birth of my child, probably the best thing that's ever happened to me, because who knows what might have happened if I hadn't had that shock, that burnout that sort of stopped me from behaving so stupidly.
Yeah, and it's only stupid in hindsight once you had the shock. At the time, it's brilliant fun.
Yeah. I didn't know that I was like, there were times where I felt stressed, but I didn't really know I was unwell. I didn't feel it coming. It was like in hindsight, throwing the stone through the window and like shaking someone's hand too hard is ridiculous. But even in that moment, I just thought, I didn't really even understand what was happening. It was all just automatic.
So you're sat in say September 2016.
Yeah.
In the fallout of a breakdown, seizure, drama. You've been accused of being a drug addict by the NHS. You've got your memory loss. It's like all over the shop. Your kind of roaring 20s have blown up in your face. So what happened then?
I went back to Manchester at the first week of September that year. That was, second week of September. So it's about exactly a month after the seizures. And I felt amazing. Like, it was like, okay, life's going to be great now. I'll be fine. I'm not going to drink coffee anymore. I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore. And I really did stick to that for a long time, actually, not drinking coffee. And I started meditating, started doing yoga, going to Bikram yoga in Manchester. And it was like, okay, this is good, it's good, it's good. And then around about March the next year, I became very, very, very depressed. So depressed, in fact, that most weekends I would just go back to my mum's house, which is about an hour away from where I lived in Manchester. And on the Sunday evening, she would drop me off at the train station. So I had my driving license taken off me because I'd had seizures. So the DVLA forced you to do that. And I remember just being stood on the platform, and honestly, the thought of jumping in front of the train did cross my head. Which now, in hindsight, seems crazy because I don't think I was that unhappy. But in that moment, I certainly did feel that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you obviously were, because you stood on it's funny, because you're sort of belittling now. We all do this, by the way. We all sort of, it was no big deal, me thinking about jumping in front of a train. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, hang on, time out. Well, that was a pretty dark moment.
Yeah, very. Because, and I got back to Manchester and I admitted it to my girlfriend. And she was like, you need to see a therapist right now. And I was like, no, I'm fine. No, it'll be fine. I can deal with it myself. Being an entrepreneur, you don't ask for help much. You speak to lots of other people that are doing similar things. At least I do. And I'm like, I listen to them, but then I make my own decision. I don't do what they say, not very often. So I was like, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And then, but about a week later, I was like, I'm still so depressed. I'm lying in bed. I can't get out of bed. I'm having to have days off work. I'm like, what is wrong with me? So I was like, right, I will go and see a therapist, but it needs to be the right person. So she gives me this big list of people that I could potentially see. And I'll basically say no to everybody apart from this one guy. And the only reason why I said yes was because he used to be an entrepreneur. He owned his own business. He had a breakdown. He sold it. I was like, whoa, he sounds like me. He also used to be a pilot, just like a small aircraft pilot. So I was like, okay, he sounds interesting. So that was I was more into having a conversation with him than I was about getting my problems fixed. And I went to meet him. I went for a session with him in Manchester the next week. And he just knew immediately what the problem was. So I had not given myself any time to consider why I'd had the burnout, what actually really deep down had caused it. And I was basically just going through life, like almost meandering at this point. And he helped me come to the conclusion that at some point I need to sell the shares in the business and go and do something crazily different to what I'd been doing before. But there was one very, very important part to that. I wanted to go next week because I'd always wanted to go to Vancouver and paddleboard in the harbour there. And I wanted to go next week. And he was like, no, you can't do that. Because if you go to Vancouver, you're just going to take all your problems with you and you might feel okay while you're there. But when you get back, it's just going to be 10 times worse. So take 6 months and fix the problems first and then go. And that's what I did. So that's when I started looking more into spirituality, like really taking that things a lot more seriously. Because one of the things that I'd come to terms with this was that there was somebody in my life, of which I'm still not 100% sure who, that I was trying to impress with the work that I did. And yoga and spirituality helped me to separate myself from that. And even to this day, it's still probably the most important thing that I do. And the more and more and more I go with it, the deeper and deeper I get, you know?
Yeah, no, I do know. And it's interesting. There's a couple of things I'd like to sort of pick up on, but like one here I think is really important just to focus on, as you said, it was this: you were trying to impress someone.
Yeah.
You don't know who. Just someone, like random people in the ether out there. And this idea that so that's point one, and it ties back to your Snapchat video thing. It's like you're okay talking to a screen.
Yeah.
But you can't actually have an honest conversation with yourself. And then there's other things. So you're on show.
Yeah.
And then I think the thing, what you're saying here about the spirituality piece and the yoga piece, and I think meditation does this for you, and just raising one's awareness, is you have a relationship with yourself or your mind and your spirit or your inner quiet voice and your gobby loud voice, and they're not the same thing. And I think that's it. So I feel like that's something I've learned anyway. Is that something that rings true to you?
Definitely. Like pre the incident, let's say, I was just, everything was a lie. Like to myself and to anyone around me, that life was perfect and things were going amazingly well. And if I'd have stood up on stage to talk about something, it would have been like, oh, entrepreneurship's amazing, and you know, everyone should start their own business and blah. And then 2 years later, when you put on Get Ahead Festival and I came down to London to speak, I just spoke so honestly about it. I talked about the wanting to jump in front of a train, how depressed I was, like weight issues, all sorts of things like that. So I'm certain that doing yoga and meditation has helped me to open up and be completely honest. So now I am not trying to impress someone. Otherwise, I would be lying. Like I'd be stood here right now and I wouldn't want to tell you about any of these bad things that have happened. But the only way that we can really feel better about it is by being totally open and honest, which is one of the main reasons behind this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I'm going to take you back to this bit where you're in with the counsellor, and you're wanting to go off to Vancouver, and he's holding you back, and he says you've got 6 months to fix your problems.
Yeah.
So, what were they? What were to underline all this stuff? What are the things that were tripping you up?
You know, I do wonder whether, like I said, I started the business to pay for flying lessons. And I think a lot of the time, was I not critical enough about it at the beginning? And like, maybe I let the company become something I never really wanted it to be. But I was desperate to just not lose face as well in front of people. I had this really weird thing, like, because like where I went to school, which is obviously where you went to school, just at a different time, I did so poorly in education. Like I didn't even get enough GCSEs to get into sixth form. My mum had to lie to Buxton College about what grades I'd got, and they only found out about a year later and then forced me to go and do like extra maths. But so I wanted to show people in that area that like actually I was doing okay. And like that meant maybe getting a car that I perhaps couldn't afford, you know, which I did do, which is a stupid thing to do. And then only like 9 months later, I got it taken off me because I had the seizures.
Right.
Yeah. And, but you know, these are amazing lessons for like a 25-year-old to have. Because I think like I see, you know, 50-year-old men who are still obsessed about having a car and like someone giving them a compliment about it. And now like I just realize how ridiculous that is. It matters zero. Really, like every single thing is like a car or a house. It's just an accessory to our lives. That's all it is. It's not. If we associate our identity too deeply with a thing we own, then we can never be truly free. Now we're getting a little bit deep here, but that is like a huge thing that I think about all the time, because 2015, my identity was so deeply wrapped in I'm an entrepreneur. This is my car. This is where I live. Look how well I'm doing. Look how well I'll be doing in 5 years. It's better than you, blah, blah, blah. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I'm also quite a reserved person a lot of the time. So I wasn't like going around town, like going, look at me, da, da, da. I was just subtly hoping people would notice. And then when they asked me, I'd get to just tell them, da, 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 da.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like this sort of disconnect between
the ego was just taking
your
over.
ego's out of control.
Yeah.
And you kind of live in you said you live in a lie. Everything was a lie, is what you said.
Yeah.
And you're trying to impress random people in the
ether, just
over nothing.
And they didn't care.
And then so this all led to the fuel of blowout. And you like, whether this is people from your old school or people in the industry or people down the road or whatever, you're trying to impress everybody else, but you're actually undermining yourself.
The other thing to bear in mind, actually, I'll just say is when you're a 21, 22-year-old owner of a company and you are being spoken to on the same level by as a 50-year-old CEO, by a 50-year-old CEO, your head starts to inflate. And then you'll have like 35-year-old marketing managers who are not being taken out to these dinners, but you are. You just lose perspective completely. And it's so hard not to become a complete dick.
So you're this 20-something big head who thinks he's cracked it. And I'm like, you're the kind of, you've cracked the code. I'm a genius. I know how to do business and social media. I'm an entrepreneur and I'm hot shit. Let's have another
somewhere deep down inside is the voice, and it's pretty loud, saying this is all fake, not true, not true. Yeah. And it's just like a battle between those two things.
And do you think that's what led you to have a breakdown?
I think so, yeah. And like when you buy an expensive car because you want someone to say something and then they don't say anything, then your ego is bruised. So you're basically subcontracting your happiness out to somebody else's opinion.
Yeah. And actually the expectation you have of that or the absence of that hurting you emotionally.
Yeah, completely. Ridiculous. It's actually again, you said, oh yeah, we all look back on things differently in hindsight. But the more, as we're speaking about it, obviously I don't think about it as much anymore because in almost every single way, I'm better now. Looking back on it, in hindsight, the whole thing was just so ridiculous. And I genuinely hope that these conversations will help younger versions of myself wake up.
Yeah, well, waking up and awakening to this sort of stuff is kind of, yeah. I mean, this is kind of why I set up the festival you mentioned, Get Ahead Festival, which is still running. It's back August the 6th. It's running. It's just this week actually. When we're recording it that week, and also with the podcast because sharing stories really helps people and puts it into your life into a context, and you have reference points. So you said earlier that this whole blow up and the fallout was the best thing that ever happened, apart from the birth of your glorious young son, Ronnie. Why was that? Because
it was like a lightning bolt of perspective, like over the course of a few days, that took me from being this egotistical person to then breaking the ego down, finding healthy ways to be happy rather than just drinking and partying, getting fit, going traveling, learning to surf, going skiing, all of these things that I'd just not been doing because the business had just become everything.
So it was like a kind of vortex that was dragging you in.
Yeah.
And actually literally could have, and was on the cusp of taking everything away from you.
Definitely. Now, there's one last element to this that I've not mentioned yet, which is, I think it was in September the next year, so about a year later, I was actually diagnosed ADHD. Now, that might be the cause of almost all the problems, actually, because I realized I hyperfocus a lot. So if I'm really into something, I will just lose myself in it. Now, the problem with hyper-focusing with ADHD is there's only so much of it you can do in a day. And I was not restricting myself. I was just staying in the mode, and I was just burning my brain out constantly, every single day. And then drinking is really bad for ADHD as well. Like drinking too much is bad, yeah. So if you just combine all those things together, of course, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. Now, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I was diagnosed at 27. Now, that's a really weird age to be diagnosed because you've lived with something your whole life. You knew you were a bit weird, but you didn't know why. And then all of a sudden you can say, okay, it's the ADHD. So that part of it's good. The bad part of it, which I'm getting much better at now, is when we use it as an excuse, we're just losing. Nobody wins. So it's like, oh, I did something stupid today. It's the ADHD. That's a terrible way to look at it. They're just words. It's just a word, ADHD. It doesn't mean anything in the context of that I've caused a problem in my life or my partner's life.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There's a book called The Chimp Paradox, which I've spoken about on the podcast before. It's a great book, really, really helped me. But often I've heard people who say that they've received the training that they offer, and then all the people running around the office are being dicks to each other and going, it's not me, it's my chimp.
Yeah.
Which is like almost the sort of opposite of what you should be doing. And actually that isn't what they teach you. They teach you to sort of take responsibility for your chimp. But the label, the word gives you an excuse. Well, I can't do that, I'm ADHD, or I can't do that, I've got depression, or I can't do that because X. And so just because I'm not actually sure myself, how do you describe what ADHD is?
It's different for people, but I think that the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a terrible name because that sounds like someone who can't pay attention to anything, who is extremely hyperactive, blah, blah. That is not true at all. Now, I can pay extreme attention to things if I'm interested in it. If I'm not interested in it, like basically the whole of school, I cannot pay attention to anything. And it is actually that black and white. Like I can say I'm reading a book that I love, I will just be in the book. I'm like in the world, like totally lost. People try and speak to me and they can't get my attention. If I'm having to read a book that I'm not interested in, I'm reading the words, but I'm thinking about something completely different. So it's completely pointless me reading those words. Like I could finish the book and not tell you a single thing that happened. But there are a lot of different ways to look at ADHD, but I prefer the hunters and the farmers analogy. So I'll explain that. There is some scientific evidence to show that people with ADHD are descendant of hunter-gatherers. So, when you're running through the forest and there's a deer going one way and a rabbit the other way, you can't stop and do a cost-benefit analysis to decide which one to chase. You just got to go for it. And often people with ADHD will chase the right thing because it's just like so high in energy and stuff. Now, what people with ADHD would have been terrible at was farming. So I'm not going to sit pulling slugs off the plants all day, every day for 12 hours. But there are a lot of people in the world that would love to do that kind of work. So the problem is when someone with ADHD tries to do that so-called farming work, sitting in an office for 8 hours doing boring work or something, that they then need medication to be able to do that. If I'm to do something exciting, like for example, sales, I find very exciting because there's a lot of dopamine rush. There's like people to speak to, lots of different conversations. There's always something to be chasing. I definitely don't need medication to do that. So I've chosen to not take medication for ADHD, even though I've been offered it, and try to fit in my box where I perform well. If I do work that I find boring and can't concentrate on, I come quite close to taking the medication. And interestingly, I've been for the past 2 years the co-owner of a fintech startup, and there's been many tasks in that work where I've come so close to taking the medication, I've had to actually go out for a walk to stop myself from doing it. So that's the way that I would describe ADHD. So I think it's extremely overdiagnosed. I think it's incredibly misunderstood. And I think it's a monopoly for pharmaceutical industry to sell medication to people that don't really need it. Some people do need it. I'm not saying that everybody doesn't, but people should really think very, very hard before taking the medication, because I coach a couple of people with ADHD, and one of them, I'm not going to give any details because it's sensitive, but he is struggling to come off the medication. So I'm seeing firsthand what it's like when someone is at the tail end of using medication, because at the very beginning it works and it's like, oh yeah, my life's great, but you're literally taking amphetamines. Like, the outcome of this cannot be good, and I'm seeing that with this guy, and a lot of the scientific research shows that as well.
Well, I met a guy who's also an entrepreneur who was drinking a lot of coffee. And he said, it's because I've got ADHD and I need to drink a lot of caffeine. Yeah. And so you're taking something where you're sort of overstimulated, or you're kind of very hyper focused, and adding a fuel to the fire almost.
Yeah.
And I think so. Here's just an observation I've got about entrepreneurial types, and maybe the listener can reflect on this themselves. Often entrepreneurial types are a bit ADHD-ish.
Definitely.
Right. So your description of hyper focus and not restricting yourself when working on a task, I do that. I actually did go and get checked out for ADHD, and I'm officially not ADHD, but I might as well be, because like I'm always chasing after like stuff and hyper focusing on things to the exclusion of other stuff, and I think there's a trait amongst entrepreneurs, particularly of the hunter trait, and I think it's something that people when you become more aware of this propensity, then you can start to do what you have done and do, which is kind of discriminate about the tasks you approach, and actually think about how you best manage that without labeling it and dosing yourself. But I think in general, it's just a good consciousness raising thing about being aware of what the bloody hell is you're doing and why, and whether it's going to suit your temperament.
I think everything has to be fast paced when you're at ADHD. So like, a meeting is okay, but it has to be fast. Like, it's like got to have lots of high energy. Like, in fact, the way that you and I speak with each other, like exactly works for me. The way that I speak with some other people, like, I glaze over after 5 minutes. Like, and I was speaking to someone the other day, and he was like, how do you cope in meetings? I was like, well, if it's boring me, I just read something on my other screen. And then when I hear my name, I try and guess what I've been asked and then reply. Like, and yeah, seriously. So but it's so black and white again. It's like, say I'm talking about, like, I don't know, a contract law or something, because I've had to speak about that quite a lot in the past couple of years. I am just like gone. There's just no brain there. Now, if I'm talking about sales strategy or something, like, I'm totally in. I'm so engaged in it. It's almost like it's like a game. It's crazy.
In what way?
It's just like, it's like fun. It's like you're playing and you don't want it to end. And like, you're going through things quite quickly. I think it depends so much on the subject and who you're speaking with.
Okay, so you kind of like, you've got these strands that you've got to be conscious of and aware of and be in the moment about when you're kind of, now you've got this quotes condition, the ADHD thing. And so you've got to sort of adapt how you approach work.
Yeah, definitely. And like, so sales is amazing because I get to find people, chase them a little bit, find clever ways to get them into a conversation, try and provide them with as much value as possible. And then when the delivery of the work begins, I get to step aside. And that's where I'll fail. I know that about myself so much now.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good to, and it's being aware of what you're good at and not good at is a lesson that everyone can benefit from. And I think one of the kind of the risks of the slightly ADHD entrepreneurial type is they sort of throw themselves into everything with equal energy, and then half of it they're not really very good at and can't stand. So drive themselves crazy, and then everybody else crazy.
Yeah, by the way, like, a hunter, ADHD or entrepreneur, needs farmers to be successful. They cannot do it on their own.
I was going to switch it up the direction a little bit because I wanted I invited Joe, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, I was prompted by my coach to set up a mastermind group. And a mastermind group is a very highfalutin way of saying a group of people who meet up and share challenges, problems, issues with each other. So I kind of curated a group of people who are new and were facing change or were running businesses or what have you. And I just want to, because I've subsequently found it to be an absolutely critically important part of me making good decisions. And I just wanted to speak about this a bit because it's how have you found that group, Joe, and what have you learned from being part of that?
Well, it's amazing because everybody's around 10 years older than me, minimum. And that means that they're like a decade ahead in terms of the experiences they've had. So if I come in with a problem, someone is going to have a solution. And every single time I've put that into action, it's improved my life. For example, last time we had the mastermind call, 2 amazing things happened. One was I was explaining that I was really not having a great time in the company that I'm running at the moment. And Colin gave me some great advice about what happens in your 30s. So like for you saying, when you're in your 20s, there's lots of people around you that can support you and you sort of like a little bit easier. You've still got your armbands on. But then when you're in your 30s, there's nobody. Like you are on your own. And like hearing that sounds scary, but it's actually so important to be totally aware of it. Mm-hmm. The other thing that happened was that you said that, I think you said, I was saying, I'm thinking about leaving the company. And you said there'll be a lot of people out there that all want your services. And like 2 days later, you messaged me and said, hey, do you want to come and work with me? And I was like, yes.
Yeah. So we've had this podcast booked in for a couple of months because I wanted to talk to Joe about his, head blowing up experience. Because that was, I was in business with Joe and we were collaborating and invested on a project. And then this whole thing happened and we've stayed like in touch and friends ever since. And I hooked you into the mastermind group because I knew you were running the financial tech startup. And then what's been interesting is the way that Joe's life has evolved and my life and business has evolved is this kind of unbelievably serendipitous moment happened about 3 weeks ago where now Joe's going to come and work with my company to help us build our brand and to build our sales pipeline. And neither of us were planning that about a month ago.
Crazy.
And definitely not want to book the podcast. So I was like, whoa, hang on. So suddenly like, and it was a mixture of things, actually. Just I think the takeaway here for anybody listening is that the mastermind group has been a critically important part of me making decisions. In fact, me getting this podcast out the door. And as you've heard, it's been beneficial to Joe. So having a group of people that meet regularly, we meet monthly for only an hour, 90 minutes, and we each share a problem or a challenge we're facing, and we have 10, 15 minutes each to discuss it. It's about five of us. Is really, really important. And secondly, serendipitous things have started to happen.
Yeah. The crazy thing about that is, so I've taken 6 months off the mastermind because of my son being born in January. I just couldn't find the time, even though I was trying. The first one I come back to, I was half an hour late. And within 20 minutes, like my life took a drastic turn for the better. That's how powerful this mastermind is for me.
Yeah, and it's kind of being open to that. Yeah. Actually, because it's funny. I just again for what it's worth, I'd been having a really bad week that week, and I was feeling my mood was very low. I was very feeling overwhelmed. Business, whilst it's going good, there's like any business, lots of challenges, and I had some worries about sales and sales pipeline, and I had a couple of things that had fallen through. And I was just feeling very negative. And I thought, oh God, I can't see how I'm going to, I need to hire someone basically to fill this role. I ain't got a clue how I'm going to approach to do that. And then that was that day. And then we rock up to this session and suddenly you're I guess, looking for the next part, a transitional part of your career, and it all worked out. So it's just an interesting thing here to sort of relax into what's going to happen. And the more you're chatting to people more broadly, you never know what's going to bubble up.
Exactly. It's funny because like you get talking to people who have a grand plan for life. Like they think that they can calculate within, perfectly what's going to happen in this decade, that decade. And like, I've not met anybody that's done that, that's actually achieved it. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a goal and that you shouldn't plan, but if you plan too meticulously or get too attached to your goals, you're basically closing yourself off for those amazing serendipitous moments that can happen.
That's a great one. Not being too attached to your goals. I think that's there's a real thing about having that sort of awareness and being in the moment, and just to sort of go, okay, when's time to adapt, to change, to shift, and maybe something's just going to bubble up, out of nowhere.
Exactly. In yoga they say if you have one eye on the goal, then you can only have one eye on the present. And so basically they actually teach you to not have any goals. Everything should just be all about the process. Now, let's say you have some sort of vision, that you're going in some sort of direction. Focus all of your energy on what happens today and tomorrow, and then what will be, will be. And that is an extremely difficult thing to do, I think, because we're all so attached to having goals. And goals do help us achieve things, but I think it can be, I think this is definitely an ADHD thing. I think there are a lot of people in the world that love sticking to a long-term goal. But I think that setting a goal for 10 years, what I want to do in 10 years, is dangerous for me because I haven't met my 41-year-old self. I have no idea what I want then. Setting a year-long goal is fine. I have a fairly good idea of what I'm going to be like in 1 year. And again, I think that there are a lot of people out there that's fine, but for someone with ADHD, that's not a good thing to do.
Well, it's a bit of a thing about having a system rather than a goal.
Definitely, yeah.
This is something that Scott Adams talks about, the Dilbert creator. Goals are for losers.
Yeah,
system. So if you want to lose weight, right, eat good every day.
Yeah.
Rather than fixating on the amount of weight. So there's actually system is eating good every day. The goal is I want to hit a certain amount of kilograms.
Yeah, that's why I write a blog post every single day. It's because, and again, it's an ADHD thing as well, but it's like, okay, I won't be writing a blog post tomorrow because I feel like it. I'll be writing one tomorrow because it's Wednesday. That's it.
Just do it. Yeah. I mean, this is great stuff. This is packed full of good stuff here, but we are getting to the end of our time and our podcast, Joe. I could go on all day. You can see this is why we get on. We can buzz and vibe on all this kind of good entrepreneurial life lessons that we've had over the years. Right, I'm going to give you 60 seconds because you like a tight deadline as an ADHD person to tell us what is there's all this advice for entrepreneurs out there. What advice should an entrepreneur ignore?
I think a lot of the time, entrepreneurs try to do everything themselves and forget that every successful entrepreneurial venture has a big team that have helped achieve some goal. Again, we're going back to goals, but it's important in this context. It's like, I want to create a tech company, so I need to learn to code, I need to learn to design, I need to learn to do the marketing, the sales, the customer service. You really don't. So when Dan Sullivan came out with this Who Not How book, and you introduced me to that about a year ago, I was like, this is probably one of the most important books for entrepreneurs that I've ever read. And it's so short as well. So that's, again, I'm kind of telling you what to do. The thing is, ignore all the advice that tells you how to be more productive in the sense of you need to do everything yourself. You don't. You can't 10x your productivity, but you can 10x the productivity of your business by getting other people who are better than you at things to do those things for you. So it's all about kind of dropping part of your ego that says there are people out there much better than me at this thing. I'm going to just let them do it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think your ego, again, is a theme throughout this. One's ego. gets in the way. It sort of tells you a lie that you should live up to it. And it also tells you you're brilliant at everything when you're obviously not, because you can't be brilliant at everything. And getting over yourself and surrendering those feelings, those emotions, allows you to progress better.
The other thing that I think about a lot is a lot of first-time entrepreneurs think that they have to be innovative to be an entrepreneur. I completely disagree with that. I think that to be a successful entrepreneur, you just have to look at what's already out there and find where there's some sort of skew. Like say, I want to buy a vegan milk, but I don't want all of these crap ingredients in it. I want it to be purely organic for these reasons. That is effectively two of exactly the same product, both vegan milks. One of them is for one type of person and another one is for a different type of person. You don't have to invent the new milk out of like potato or something. You can still make the almond milk. It just needs to have different ingredients in it and it will appeal to somebody different.
There you go, everybody. You don't need to be innovative. And Joe's potato milk will be hitting shelves imminently. Well, Joe,
you heard it here first.
You did hear it. Potato milk forthcoming. Joe's milk coming soon. Where's the best place for people to find out more about what you're up to? Where can we read your daily blog?
Yeah, every day I blog. Usually 9 a.m. in the morning. It's up there. josephpack.com.
So
best place for it?
JOSEPHPACK. Joseph Pack. So Joseph with a PH.com. We'll put that in the show notes along with any other interesting links. And well, what a great conversation. Joe, always great to see you. Great conversation. Please share, subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff on the podcast. We are trying to help people through this. So that if you can help us help others by doing that. And so I'll see you next time on the podcast. And Joe, I'll see you soon because we're working together now. So I'll catch you in a bit, mate.
Nice one. Thank you. Enjoyed this a lot.
Yeah, me too. Take care. Bye. Do you want to get the top 5 tidbits from each episode emailed to your inbox every Friday? Yes, you do. It saves you having to go through and make notes and make a note of all the books and all the ideas that are in the podcast. We go through and we choose the top 5 we like, plus put all the links into that email. So if you just go up to honeyiblewupthebusiness.com, yes, that's honeyiblewupthebusiness.com, and just enter your email address. There's a little box, just enter it in, and we will send you that information. And it saves you having to make notes and all that. That's make your life a bit easier. And of course, if you did enjoy the episode, please consider subscribing. We are trying to help people through this. So the more people that subscribe, review, rate on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the more people will see it and the more we can help. So help us help other people, other entrepreneurs like you. And before I go, I've got to say big up to my company, the tech department, the company we blew up and put back together again. They're generously supporting me on this mission through the podcast. So if you guys want to have a look at a company that can really help you improve your technology, make it better so your business gets better too, boosting your sales and your profit and a bit more sanity in your life, a little less stress, then head up to thetechdept.com, the tech department. My company, give us a look. On behalf of all of us here, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.